The bloodstain on the bedsheet, just that small detail alone changed my entire life. That morning I woke up in an unfamiliar room, the dim light filtering through the blinds like a thin blade slicing into my heavy eyelids. My head throbbed like it had been hammered, my throat parched and scratchy, and the first thing I registered was the warmth of someone lying right next to me. I turned my head and my heart nearly stopped. There, beside me, was Sophia. She was asleep, her face turned slightly away, her lashes fluttering faintly as if trapped in an uneasy dream. Her dark hair spilled across the pillow, her lips parted just enough, peaceful in a way that made my chest tighten. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be lying next to her. Last night was the company's end-of-year party at a bustling bar in downtown Seattle where everyone was drinking, laughing, and the music was so loud it drowned out any sense of direction. I remembered standing near the bar nursing just one drink for show because I'd planned to leave early. But then I spotted Sophia out on the balcony standing alone, her shoulders hunched against the cold, or maybe against something deeper than the chill. I'd walked over and asked if she was okay. She turned, her eyes red-rimmed, but she forced a thin, fragile smile that scared me more than anything, and said she was fine. She just wanted to stop thinking. I'd stupidly thought bringing her home was just a kind gesture. I'd thought I was doing the right thing. But looking at Sophia beside me now, I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I sat up abruptly, pulling the sheet over myself, my heart pounding erratically, trying to piece together the fragments of memory. But they were just shards. The sound of the car tires on the wet night roads, her leaning her head against the window in silence, me sitting across from her, reminding myself I was just dropping her off. At her suburban apartment door, she fumbled for her keys and I took them to help unlock it. She whispered thanks, then turned and looked at me with eyes that weren't those of a colleague anymore. Not polite small talk, but a desperate woman clinging to the one thing keeping her from falling apart. And then she kissed me. Not a seductive kiss, not a calculated one, but a kiss like a plea. I should have stopped it, but I didn't. I leaned down, my feet hitting the cold floor. And right as I stood, my eyes glanced back at the bed. I saw it. The bloodstain on the sheets. Just a small spot, but it glared against the white fabric like an accusation. I froze. The blood drained from my face in an instant. I bent down to look again, as if I couldn't believe it. Not because of scandal or gossip, but because a horrifying wave crashed over me like a punch. She'd given me something she could never get back, and I'd taken it on a night when she was vulnerable, drunk, broken. I slumped back onto the edge of the bed, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't even grip my shirt, staring at Sophia still sleeping peacefully while my mind screamed with regret like an alarm bell. What the hell had I done? I was the younger one, the sober one, the one who should have protected her, and instead I'd let this happen. I felt nauseous, felt like I despised myself, felt like I'd stolen the purest part of a woman not through force, but through her fragility and my own failure. Sophia stirred slightly and opened her eyes, her gaze still hazy. She said my name, her voice small and raspy. I jumped up like I'd been burned, not daring to meet her eyes, grabbing my shirt and pulling it on hastily, my throat clogged. I said I had to go. There was a long silence. Then she just whispered, "Okay." Just that one word, and it twisted my heart. I stumbled out of the apartment like I was fleeing, and in my mind, the only image left was that bloodstain on the sheets, like an indelible mark of a mistake I didn't know how to fix. The rest of the morning blurred into a haze of panic and self-loathing. I drove back to my small studio apartment on the outskirts of Seattle, the rain pattering against the windshield like accusations. Every red light felt like a judgment. Every glance in the rearview mirror showed a face I barely recognized. Pale, haunted, guilty. How had it come to this? Sophia was my coworker, older than me by at least a decade, someone I'd always seen as composed and distant. We'd worked together for over a year at the software design firm, but our interactions were professional nods in the hallway, brief exchanges in meetings. She was the quiet one in the design department, always delivering her work on time, never drawing attention. I'd never thought of her as vulnerable until last night. And now? Now I'd shattered that image, and worse, I'd shattered something irreplaceable in her. I parked the car and sat there for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The bloodstain replayed in my mind over and over, a vivid red against white, symbolizing everything I'd ruined. She must have been a virgin. How else to explain it? At her age? It didn't make sense, but the evidence was there, undeniable. And I'd been the one to take that from her, in a moment of weakness fueled by alcohol and loneliness. I wasn't some predator, I hadn't planned this. But intent didn't matter, the result did. I felt like a thief, like I'd exploited her pain for my own fleeting comfort. Tears stung my eyes as I finally got out of the car, slamming the door harder than necessary. Inside my apartment, I paced the small living room, the walls closing in. What if she regretted it? What if she hated me now? What if this destroyed her even more? The guilt gnawed at me, a constant ache in my chest. I couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in that moment before the kiss. Lost, pleading. And I hated myself for not walking away. By afternoon, the weight of it all pressed down so hard I could barely breathe. I collapsed onto the couch, staring at my phone, debating whether to text her. But what would I say? Sorry for last night? It sounded pathetic, inadequate. She deserved better than that. She deserved someone who hadn't let things spiral out of control. I scrolled through old work emails, trying to distract myself, but every mention of her name jumped out like an accusation. Sophia had always been the steady one. The woman who handled deadlines with quiet efficiency, who never complained about late nights or tough clients. I'd admired that about her from afar, but now I'd tainted it all. The bloodstain haunted me, proof that I'd crossed into territory I had no right to. Was she okay? Was she hurting physically, emotionally? The thought made me sick. I buried my face in my hands, the regret flooding over me in waves. This wasn't who I was. Or was it? In that moment of weakness, had I revealed my true self? A guy who couldn't say no when he should have? The silence of the apartment amplified my thoughts, turning them into echoes of condemnation. I knew I had to face her eventually, at work if nowhere else. But the idea terrified me. What if she looked at me with disgust? What if she never spoke to me again? The pain of that possibility cut deeper than I expected, revealing something I hadn't admitted to myself. I cared about her more than just as a colleague. But that realization only made the guilt worse. I'd ruined any chance of something real before it even began. As the sun set outside my window, casting long shadows across the room, I sat there in the growing darkness, the weight of my mistake pressing down like an unbreakable chain. Throughout that entire day, I couldn't shake the gnawing torment building in my chest. Every detail from the night before replayed in my mind like a slow-motion film, leaving me more confused and ashamed with each loop. I remembered standing silently on the balcony watching Sophia for a long moment before I dared to approach and check on her. She was the oldest woman in the design department at our software firm in Seattle, kind and unassuming, always quietly getting her work done without drawing attention to herself. At the office, I'd only known her as a reserved colleague, someone who never stood out, certainly not the type to seem fragile. Yet there she was that night, alone under the hazy lights, clutching her drink with both hands as if afraid she'd drop everything. And just one look told me she was truly exhausted. I wasn't the type to pry into other people's personal lives, especially someone as private as Sophia. But when she forced that strained smile and said she just wanted to stop thinking, I recognized it as a quiet cry for help that only the lonely would catch. As I helped her into the cab, I told myself I was just getting her home safely out of basic decency, and then I'd head out. But the moment Sophia squeezed my hand lightly at her door, her eyes filled with fatigue and a desperate need for safety, I couldn't understand why I couldn't turn away. When she whispered, "I just need to feel safe," even if it's just once, it felt like our worlds, mine and hers, had shrunk to two lost souls clinging to their own sorrows. And yet, that morning, seeing the bloodstain on the sheets, the guilt swallowed me whole. I couldn't stop questioning myself. Was I really the kind of guy who exploited a woman's vulnerability? Had I shattered the boundaries Sophia had worked so hard to maintain, all because of a moment I mistook for empathy? My head was a storm of unanswered questions, each one making me feel smaller and more selfish than ever. Throughout the following days, I avoided her at work, always taking a different route or burying myself in tasks to stay busy. Sophia kept her distance too. No accusations, no questions, just a faint nod if we accidentally passed in the hallway. That silence was more terrifying than any criticism could be. I started realizing that in a life full of ordinary, lonely people like us, a single offbeat moment could drive two people apart forever. And that feeling, the regret, the remorse over a night I didn't know whether to call love or a mistake, pressed down on me relentlessly, refusing to let go even for a second. The avoidance became a routine, a shield I hid behind, but it only amplified the inner turmoil. I'd catch glimpses of her in meetings, her head bowed over her laptop, her expression neutral, and it twisted something inside me. Sophia had always been the reliable one, the woman who handled client revisions with quiet grace, who stayed late without complaint. I'd respected that from a distance, but now I'd tainted it. The bloodstain haunted my thoughts, a stark reminder that I'd taken something irrevocable. How could she have been a virgin at her age? It didn't add up, but the proof was there, undeniable. And I'd been the one to claim it on a night clouded by alcohol and despair. I wasn't a monster. I hadn't intended this. But intentions didn't erase consequences. The damage was done. I felt like a fraud, like I'd used her pain for my own momentary solace. Tears would well up unexpectedly as I drove home from work, the Seattle traffic blurring through the windshield. What if she was in pain now, physically or emotionally? The idea made my stomach churn. I buried my face in my pillow at night, the regret flooding in waves. This wasn't me. Or was it? In that lapse of judgment, had I exposed my true nature, a man who couldn't resist when he should have walked away? The quiet of my studio amplified my self-doubt, turning it into relentless echoes. I knew we'd have to face each other eventually, back at the office if nowhere else. But the prospect filled me with dread. What if she looked at me with revulsion? What if she never acknowledged me again? The ache of that possibility cut deeper than anticipated, uncovering a truth I'd buried. I cared for her, beyond mere professionalism. But that epiphany only deepened the shame. I destroyed any potential for something genuine before it could even spark. As days turned into a week, the burden grew heavier, a constant shadow over my every move. Work suffered. I missed deadlines, zoned out in conversations. Friends noticed my distraction, but I brushed them off with excuses about stress. How could I explain? The isolation fed the cycle, leaving me trapped in a loop of what-ifs and self-reproach. Evenings were the worst when the city lights flickered on outside my window, reminding me of the balcony where it all began. I'd pour a glass of water, avoiding alcohol now like it was poison, and sit staring at the wall, dissecting every choice. Why hadn't I insisted on calling her a cab alone? Why had I let her pull me inside? The answers always circled back to my own weakness, my failure to be the better person. Sophia's whisper echoed in my ears. I just need to feel safe. And I'd given her the opposite: regret, exposure, pain. The bloodstain symbolized it all, a permanent scar on what should have been a simple act of kindness. I scrolled through my phone one night, hovering over her contact, but deleted every draft message. I'm sorry felt hollow. She deserved an explanation, accountability, but I was too coward to face it. The office gossip started subtly, a whispered comment here, a sidelong glance there, but it fueled my paranoia. Did they know? Had she told someone? The thought of her suffering alone because of me was unbearable. I pictured her at home, curled up in that same bed, staring at the stained sheets with the same horror I'd felt. It broke me. By the end of the week, the remorse had evolved into a deep-seated ache, a realization that I'd not only hurt her but damaged myself in the process. I couldn't eat properly, sleep evaded me, and the mirror reflected a hollow version of the guy I'd been. This mistake wasn't just a night gone wrong. It was a mirror to my flaws, forcing me to confront how easily good intentions could lead to devastation. And through it all, the silence between us stretched like an unbridgeable chasm, leaving me drowning in the what could have beens. Those days dragged on like I was living under a thick, suffocating blanket I couldn't shake off. At the office, Sophia and I became nothing more than distant shadows passing each other, maintaining just enough space to avoid any real contact, no glances, no extra greetings. I'd try to bury myself in my tasks, staring at my computer screen until the code blurred, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in knots of shame and fear. The more I dodged her, the smaller I felt, shrinking under the weight of my own inadequacy, barely able to lift my head whenever I heard whispers in the break room about that end-of-year party mishap. The rumors started creeping in slowly at first, like weeds pushing through cracks in concrete. I'd overhear snippets, a coworker murmuring that I'd taken advantage of an older woman's vulnerability to feed my ego, another suggesting Sophia had thrown herself at a younger guy for attention. None of it was true, but the poison of it seeped in anyway, making my shame thicken until it felt like I was drowning. I knew those words were cruel and baseless, yet they mirrored my worst fears about myself, amplifying the guilt until I could barely look anyone in the eye. Sophia, meanwhile, carried on with her usual poise in front of everyone, her face a mask of calm as she navigated meetings and deadlines. But I could see the cracks, the way her shoulders tensed under prying stares, the subtle withdrawal that made her seem even more isolated. Behind that facade, I imagined the hurt festering, raw and unspoken. The biggest barrier wasn't our age difference or our roles at work. It was this crushing sense of unworthiness that gnawed at me constantly. I was just a young guy, clumsy and inexperienced, who'd never truly grappled with the deep loneliness that comes with adulthood. Sophia had lived through so much, losses I could only guess at, years of building walls to protect herself, and she was used to handling it all alone, too afraid to let anyone see her cracks. The idea of me, of all people, being the one to expose her vulnerability made me sick. Sometimes I'd catch sight of her sitting alone by the window in the office cafe, her gaze distant, lips pressed tight like she was holding back an old sorrow no one else could touch. It killed me to think I'd added to that pain, that my failure had pushed her further into isolation. One afternoon, I mustered the courage to send her a message, my fingers hovering over the screen for what felt like an eternity before I hit send. It was simple, just checking in to see if she was all right. The response came back cold and clipped. "I'm fine. Don't worry about it." Those words slammed the door shut on any lingering hope, leaving me staring at my phone in the empty break room, the sting of rejection mixing with my regret until it formed a knot in my throat I couldn't swallow. I understood then that from the moment of that bloodstain, we'd diverged into separate worlds. She was retreating deeper into her shell, and I was left floundering in mine, the distance between us growing like an unhealable wound. The pain lingered, a constant throb that colored everything. Nights blurred into sleepless hours where I'd replay the party, the cab ride, the kiss, each time wondering if I could have changed the outcome. Work became a battlefield. I'd force smiles in team huddles, but inside, I was unraveling. Friends outside the office picked up on my mood, asking if something was wrong, but I deflected with vague talk of deadlines and fatigue. How could I confess? The isolation only fed the hurt, turning it into a cycle of self-inflicted torment. I'd drive home through the rainy Seattle streets, the wipers swishing like a metronome counting my failures, and collapse into bed only to stare at the ceiling, haunted by what-ifs. What if I'd walked away at the door? What if I'd been stronger? The answers never came, just more ache, more regret. Sophia's brief reply echoed in my mind, a barrier I couldn't breach, leaving me adrift in a sea of unspoken sorrow. I felt the loss acutely, not just of her, but of the person I thought I was, now fractured by one irreversible night. The days stretched on, each one heavier than the last, until the pain became a dull, persistent companion, a reminder that some mistakes carve deep, leaving scars that time alone might never fully mend. That evening, after days of tormenting myself, I sat alone in my small studio apartment on the outskirts of Seattle, my mind a chaotic mess of thoughts about everything I'd lost. I knew I couldn't keep living like a fugitive from my own conscience forever. If I stayed silent, both Sophia and I would carry this wound that might never heal. For the first time, I resolved to do the one right thing in my life. I'd go see her, lay out everything I felt, no matter the outcome. As I picked up my phone to text her, the screen lit up suddenly. A new message from Sophia. It was short, just one line. "If you're free, could you come over to my place?" I read it over and over, my heart racing, a mix of shock and relief choking me up. I headed to Sophia's apartment that very night. Her small place was still lit up, the door slightly ajar as if expecting me. Sophia stood in the living room, her face composed but her eyes flickering with anxiety. Neither of us spoke for those first few minutes, just a long, heavy silence that gave me enough time to realize how much I'd missed her. I stepped closer, no longer hiding the turmoil inside me. "Sophia, I'm sorry for letting things go this far. I'm sorry for not having the courage to stay when you needed me. If you'll let me, I want to be there for you, not to fix the past, but to face it together." Sophia didn't respond right away. She just looked at me steadily for a long while, then suddenly moved forward, resting her head on my shoulder. I felt her body tremble slightly, as if all the strength she'd been holding onto was finally releasing. "I don't need anyone to rescue me," she said, her voice soft and warm, cracking in the quiet space. "I just want to know if someone's willing to sit with me when I'm at my weakest." I wrapped my arms around her. In that instant, I wasn't the impulsive young guy anymore, nor the one burdened by guilt. I was simply someone who'd found the most precious thing in his life. We sat together for a long time, not needing to fill the air with words. The tears that fell onto my shoulder were her forgiveness, her acknowledgement, her trust that even after the worst, two lonely people deserve to heal when they found each other. The room felt different now, softer under the warm glow of her lamp, the faint scent of her lavender candle lingering in the air. I held her closer, feeling the rise and fall of her breathing sync with mine, a rhythm that calmed the storm inside me. For the first time since that morning, the bloodstain's image faded, replaced by this moment of raw honesty. Sophia pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting mine, still glistening but clearer now. "I've been carrying this alone for so long," she whispered. "The party, it wasn't just the alcohol, it was everything building up. Years of feeling invisible, of wondering if anyone would ever see me beyond the quiet designer in the corner." I nodded, my throat tight. "I saw you. That night on the balcony, I saw someone strong who's been holding too much. And I wanted to be there, but I messed it up." She shook her head gently. "We both did. But maybe that's how it starts. Messy, real." Her words hit me like a lifeline, pulling me from the depths of my self-doubt. We talked then, not about the details of that night, but about the before and after. She shared fragments of her life I'd never known. The quiet divorce years ago that left her guarded, the way work became her shield against loneliness. I opened up about my own fears, how being younger made me feel like I had to prove myself constantly, how that night exposed my insecurities. It wasn't a confession booth. It was two people finally seeing each other without barriers. As the hours slipped by, the weight lifted bit by bit. Sophia's hand found mine, her fingers intertwining with a tentative warmth that spoke volumes. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I didn't know if you'd want to after everything." I squeezed her hand. I had to. Running wasn't fixing anything. We didn't rush to define what this was, no promises of forever, no labels. Instead, we just existed in that space, healing in the quiet. She leaned against me again, and for the first time I felt a glimmer of peace, like the pieces of us, broken as they were, might fit together somehow. The night deepened outside her window, the city lights twinkling faintly, but inside, something shifted. We weren't erasing the mistake. We were acknowledging it, turning it into a bridge rather than a wall. And in her embrace, I found the courage to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. Not despite the pain, but through it. By the time I glanced at the clock, it was late, but neither of us moved to end it. Sophia's breathing steadied, her body relaxing fully against mine for the first time. "Stay a little longer?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, pulling her closer. In that simple request lay the start of our healing, a quiet admission that we needed each other, flaws and all. The guilt that had consumed me began to loosen its grip, replaced by a tentative hope. We sat there, wrapped in the silence, letting the wounds breathe. knowing that true mending comes not from forgetting, but from facing the truth together. After that night, things didn't transform magically, but the darkness that had hung over us began to lift, bit by bit. Sophia and I started over from the simplest places, no longer dodging each other at the office, no more averting our eyes in the hallways. We didn't dwell on the past much, and we certainly didn't rush to slap a label on whatever this was between us. Mornings at work, I'd brew an extra cup of coffee and quietly set it on her desk before she arrived, a small gesture that said more than words could. Afternoons after clocking out, she'd wait for me by the door and we'd walk together around the small park behind the building, chatting about nothing important. The weather in Seattle, a funny client email, the way the leaves were starting to turn with the approaching fall. It was ordinary, but in that ordinariness, we found a rhythm that felt right. There were still moments when the doubt crept back in, when I'd feel the twinge of remorse twisting in my gut, replaying that bloodstain or the coldness of her initial silence. I'd freeze up sometimes, questioning if I deserved this second chance, if my mistake had marked us permanently. But Sophia would sense it, her hand brushing mine lightly, and she'd say something gentle like, "No one gets through life without messing up. It's about facing it and moving forward together." Her words weren't dramatic. They were steady, like her, reminding me that healing wasn't about erasing the hurt, but acknowledging it and choosing to keep going anyway. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence, on her couch after a long day or on a bench in the park, and that quiet would wrap around us like a comfort I'd never known before. No need for explanations or apologies anymore. Just being there was enough. We didn't sketch out grand plans for the future. Sophia was still the older woman with her quiet routines, curling up with a book on rainy evenings, tending to the potted flowers on her balcony that brought a splash of color to her otherwise simple apartment. And I was still the younger guy figuring out adulthood, juggling code deadlines and late-night jogs to clear my head. But now, waking up each morning, I no longer felt that hollow drift, like I was navigating life alone. I knew I wasn't isolated anymore, and neither was she. That knowledge settled in my chest like a steady anchor, turning the everyday into something meaningful. A shared glance across the office during a meeting, a quick text about grabbing lunch. These little things built a bridge over the chasm we'd almost fallen into. It wasn't perfect. There were rough patches. A coworker once made a snide comment about the party, and I saw Sophia's face tighten, the old hurt flickering back. I'd pull her aside later, and we'd talk it through, her head on my shoulder as we sat in her living room, the city hum outside fading into the background. "We're stronger for it," she'd say, and I'd believe her because we'd proven it. The rumors died down eventually, replaced by the mundane flow of office life. But even if they hadn't, we'd learned to let them slide off us. Our connection wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was ours, forged in vulnerability and choice. In time, the healing deepened. We'd take weekend drives out to the Puget Sound, watching the ferries cut through the water, talking about dreams we'd shelved. Her wish to travel more, my half-formed ideas of starting a side project. Laughter came easier, the kind that bubbled up unexpectedly over burnt toast or a silly movie. Physical closeness returned too, but slower, more intentional, without the haze of that night. It was about trust now, about building something real from the ashes of our mistake. I found myself opening up in ways I never had, sharing fears about my future, and she'd listen without judgment, her presence a balm. And through it all, I came to understand that the most important thing wasn't who healed whom. It was two people daring to sit side by side, listening to and accepting each other's scars, choosing to walk forward together in peace and hope. We might not have a fairy tale ending mapped out, but in the quiet moments, holding her hand as the rain pattered against the window, I knew this was enough. This was our happiness, imperfect and true, a testament to what happens when you face the pain instead of running from it.